Right, in this chapter, we're going to talk about the weapons, guns, that are used in order to commit mass murder. So James Holmes, the shooter from the Aurora, Colorado movie theater, purchased thousands of rounds of ammunition from out-of-state sources online. He was able to do this because the Firearms Owners Protection Act of 1986 eliminated licensing and record-keeping requirements for retail sales of ammunition, and it also lifted restrictions on interstate ammunition transfers. So, one of the reasons we have so many men committing these crimes, or so many of these crimes are committed by men, has a lot to do with the choice of weapons. So men have unequal access to and training in the use of handguns and long guns, and many have grown up around them or had military training. So several factors have kind of come together and they produce this deadly mix of resentment and despair. First, there's a growing number of middle-aged men, and they're losing aspects of their lives that give them meaning and support, in particular their families and jobs. There's a shrinking and competitive labor market, and a higher rate of divorce, greater residential mobility, and general lack of neighborliness has left many feeling alone. So some of these very desperate people feel they have no place to turn. And weapons, especially high-powered ones, or rather firearms, are most often used in rampage-style killings. So among the 27 mass murders in the U.S. since 1900 that involved at least 10 victims, 22 of them involved a firearm. So after these events, we often see heated public debate about gun control and gun rights. And so we have this one argument that if firearms weren't so easily available, we wouldn't have so much carnage. And then we have other people arguing, well, if we armed people, they would be able to defend themselves. But is it really realistic that these people will whip out a gun and stop the assailant? In fact, a gunman could actually secure additional weapons from victims carrying firearms. And this happened with Aaron Alexis. Aaron Alexis had been denied the purchase of an AR-15, so he entered the Navy Yard armed with a shotgun, and he was able to pick up a couple semi-automatic 9mm pistols and ammunition from two people that he shot and killed. Many of the Navy's employees were carrying authorized firearms, but their presence didn't really deter that. In the aftermath of Newtown, media and political leaders decried the fact that there had been a federal ban on assault weapons that had gone into effect in 1994, and it had a sunset provision and was allowed to expire in 2004. So some members of Congress and the Obama administration after the Newtown shooting pushed to try to restore that, but the NRA opposed it, and eventually the gun control bills failed. So many Americans are supportive of improving the process for background checks. And while this seems like an easy idea, there's actually a lot of practical limits to it. So most mass killers are able to legally purchase a gun, and others may borrow or steal one. Everytown for Gun Safety found that 38% of mass shootings were carried out by so-called prohibited possessors. So these are people who are unable to legally secure a gun. Could be because of their age, felony conviction, domestic violence, or some kind of mental health issue that prohibits them from owning them. But most were still able to obtain a weapon, either through a third party, or there were some cases where the background check failed to catch a person that wasn't allowed to have a weapon. Both New York and Tennessee require mental health professionals to report potentially dangerous patients to CJ agencies. And California also adopted a 5-year gun ban on individuals who utter threatening statements regarding particular people during the course of psychotherapy. But if we were to expand this and use a much broader definition of mental illness, this could become pretty difficult. First of all, it'd be very costly to implement, and it would really infringe on people's civil liberties. We also know that clinical assessments are not designed to predict future behavior, and even if we use risk assessment tools, we know that they are not good at predicting that, and they have a high rate of false positives. Attempts to limit access to guns based on very broad definitions of mental illness would also stigmatize people who do have mental illness as being potential mass killers. It also would make it really difficult. How would mental health professionals be able to screen for that? And it may in turn ultimately deter some people from even seeking treatment. So the argument against the assault weapons is obviously that it allows someone to fire off large numbers of rounds without reloading. If someone had to stop and reload, that would give victims time to escape, and it would also perhaps provide an opportunity to subdue an assailant. Everytown for Gun Safety said mass shootings involving assault weapons and or high-capacity magazines results in 155% more victims being shot and 47% more fatalities. The increase in the number of mass shootings per 100 million people after the expiration of the assault weapons ban is traced to just a few cases that had particularly large death tolls. And the overwhelming majority of mass murderers used firearms that wouldn't have been banned by the assault weapon ban. And so here we have some data that looks at pre- and post-assault weapons ban. So about 2/3 of mass shootings since 2009 involved one or more handguns, and of 72 public mass shootings since 1982, 70% relied exclusively or primarily on semi-automatic handguns. So a legal limit would compel a gunman to have to pause to reload or switch weapons, but this wouldn't necessarily create that opportunity for escape because many will bring multiple weapons. So Stephen Paddock, who committed the shooting in January of 2018 in Las Vegas, brought 23 firearms with him. So what about if we allow people to conceal carry? Well, we're going to start to get a lot of people reporting a man with a gun. How many false alarms would we have? And how would it be possible for someone responding to know who is the good guy and who is the bad guy? And citizens that are armed probably don't have the skills necessary to respond without making the situation worse. We also know that many mass killings do take place in locations that are gun-free zones, and the choice of location is based on the grievance, not whether or not they expect to be met with resistance. So analysis of right-to-carry laws and mass killings between 77 and 95 found that legislation does work to suppress mass violence. But when we look at this through a better methodology, we find that that effect is negligible. So concealed carry and right to carry does not reduce mass shootings. After Newtown, the NRA called to arm every school in America. And we have seen this after Parkland, where people are talking about arming faculty. In 2013, South Dakota created school Sentinels. These are teachers, administrators, etc., that are empowered to carry guns inside of schools. And this enjoys a lot of support. About 2/3 of Americans like this idea, believing it's a powerful deterrent. But if a vengeful student is coming into a school hell-bent on committing mass murder and is willing to die by suicide, would they be deterred by armed faculty? A lot of schools already have police officers on site, and there were officers present at both Columbine and Parkland.